The Ultramarines have been the shining examples of the perfect Codex Astartes Space Marine chapter. In fact, they're one of the oldest representations of Space Marines in the Warhammer 40,000 mythos, with the very first Space Marines, admittedly being the Crimson Fists, appearing on the cover of the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader back in 1987. Since then, the Ultramarines have made up the backbone of the Space Marine fluff, the all-too-common Smurfs, as they are both lovingly and spitefully called by fans of the Warhammer universe. Who leads this chapter of blue, white, and gold Marines? What is the grand legacy that he has created with his name? Marneus Calgar, the Lord of Macragge and Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, stands out as one of the big three of the Chapter Masters of the Space Marines. We've already discussed Dante, but Marneus of the Ultramarines and Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves are names that even common Imperial citizens speak about in hushed awe and admiration. In this video, we're going to discuss the history of Marneus Augustus Calgar, and now his story and how it fits into the current narrative of the 8th edition Dark Imperium, with the return of the Ultramarines Primarch, Roboute Guilliman. Now let's head to the eastern fringes, to the realm of Ultramar, to begin our tale of Papa Smurf himself. Now unfortunately, we don't have a ton of knowledge about the early life of Calgar. In fact, we have very little information on the man. Truth be told, this was very much the case for Dante, Mephiston, and even Abaddon. We only recently have come to learn about their early lives, or in Abaddon's case, what happened after the heresy and before the First Crusade, in the last 3 or 4 years of publications. And hopefully we'll get an expansion on this to Marneus in the years to come. A lot of the older publications, like the 2nd edition Ultramarines Codex, state that Calgar was found amongst the humans taken by the Tyranid Hive Fleet Locust at the age of 14, who was then recruited into the Ultramarine. Then you get that same preamble you get of quickly rising through the ranks, so on and so forth, and this is gleaned more from old Tyranid codexes and White Dwarfs as well that kind of expand on this narrative. So we can take that with a grain of salt, as a lot of conflicts with the notion that the first recorded Imperial contact with the Tyranids is with Hive Fleet Behemoth in the First Tyrannic War, which will also be our first subject to cover. In the 754th year of the 41st millennium, the Hive Fleet Behemoth entered the eastern fringes, attacking the realm of Ultramar and making way directly for Macragge, the home planet of the Ultramarines. And you have to understand that this is the first recorded incident in which the Imperium encounters the Tyranids. No one had witnessed how they persecuted war until this point. So we get these reports that come in of the Tyranid fleets stripping every world entirely of life. Calgar set himself the defenses of Macragge. Shoring up the polar fortresses and bolstering the planetary defense platforms, he would meet the enemy head-on, leading from the front. And this has become one of the defining traits of Calgar. Like some sci-fi version of Stonewall Jackson during the American Civil War, Marneus will stand outside of cover, commanding as a righteous prow to the grand ship that is the Imperium, his twin fists of Ultramar blazing a path for the Chapter Master. And as the Tyranid Vanguard fleet broke into orbit around Macragge, Calgar divided his fighting forces into 3 grand armies, one for each of the 2 polar fortresses, and the third commanded by him personally. The Imperial naval elements created a defensive cordon around the planet, preventing the mass of Tyranid ships from getting much further into the system. Despite the combined firepower from the orbital defense stations, ships, and polar fortresses, hundreds of Tyranid bioships were able to still break the blockade. And when the Tyranids made planetfall at Cold Steel Ridge on Macragge, they were met with the tactical precision of the Ultramarines. Calgar used his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, luring the Tyranids into kill boxes through choke points and leveraging any means necessary to negate the sheer numbers of his enemy. Concentrated fire coupled with lightning strikes allowed the Ultramarines to gain the upper hand in the conflict, breaking down the synapse creatures that control the Tyranids. And for those of you that are new to Warhammer 40,000, Tyranids are a race of insectoid bioconstructs. I guess that's the easiest way for me to put it together. They attack with sheer numbers. They're smaller drone fighters controlled by larger creatures through what is called a synapse creature. The entire race is controlled by one big hive mind that creates everything and absorbs the information across every single Tyranid organism in the galaxy. It's truly terrifying. I mean, not to get into a huge tirade here, but think StarCraft Zerg. In fact, way back in like the 90s when StarCraft came out, Blizzard was originally contracted by Games Workshop to make a Warhammer 40,000 RTS, and by the time they had finished the Space Marines, Terrans, and halfway through the Tyranids, or Zerg, they decided to break off and make the game for themselves, thus creating StarCraft with Terran, Protoss, and Zerg. That's why they have such a very similar connection to the two. But this is just to help you guys kind of make a comparison between who the Zerg are and who the Tyranid are, because they're very similar. But back on track. No matter how many Tyranids that were put down, the enemy kept coming in greater and greater force. The Tyranids are nothing if not adaptable, finding ways to outwit the Marines' tactics. The leader of the Tyranids' ground forces was a gigantic hive tyrant, who was able to divert its forces into ambushes and counterattacks against the Ultramarines. Hive tyrants come in various flavors, from mint chocolate chip to flying bat-winged variants, and a Swarm Lord is what attacked Macragge. A gigantic four-armed monster with each arm holding an exceptionally sharp bone saber, able to cleave down a Marine in Terminator armor easily. Now, seeing the situation as lost, Calgar made for a retreat back to orbit. The Swarm Lord saw this and went directly for Calgar, looking to cut off the head of the leadership, per se. And a tactic that the Marines had been using the entire time, which is kind of an interesting juxtaposition here. But Marneus fought back against the surge of Tyranids, attacking the tyrant's hive warrior bodyguards and suffering massive wounds across his entire body as sharp talons plunged into vulnerable points and claws raked his armor. When the Swarm Lord and Calgar met on the field, Marneus was already on the verge of death. Using every bit of his strength, the chapter master was still brought down by the hive tyrant. Before the killing blow could be struck, though, Calgar's own personal bodyguard leapt in to shield their liege while withdrawing back to orbit. Marneus lay beaten and broken, but still alive, able to recover quickly to fight another day due to his freakish Space Marine metabolism and space steroids. But by now, the main portion of the Tyranid hive fleet was entering the system, and what happened next was a grueling orbital fight between the thousands upon thousands of Tyranid bioships and all manner of Imperial firepower. The growing staccato of gunfire ripped through ship after ship, chunks of Tyranid detritus floating through the Macragge orbit as each missile, macro cannon, and laser struck home. And despite the massive casualties, the Tyranids were still able to land thousands of their equivalent of drop pods at the polar fortresses before retreating. Marneus took to the hunt, leaving his armies already in position to fend off the siege of Macragge. Marneus was dedicated not to let this terror rampage across Ultramar, let alone the greater Imperium. Catching the Hive Fleet behemoth between his own fleet and Battlefleet Baka of the Imperial Navy, Marneus destroyed the Tyranid entirely, the battleship Domitus Astra sacrificing itself to detonate its warp drive, sending the beasts into the abyss. But as Calgar returned to Macragge to relieve his brothers, the devastation the enemy had wrought was massive. When the Third Company fought their way to the polar fortresses guarding the northern pole of Macragge, they had found the Terminators of the First Company dead in a semicircle around a massive heap of Tyranids. Their last stand, a testament to the veracity and dedication of the chapter. After the First Tyrannic Wars, Marneus Calgar and the Ultramarines would go on to educate the grander Imperium on how to combat the Tyranids, the remaining survivors being reconstituted into a newly reformed First Company of Ultramarines dubbed Tyrannic War Veterans. In Tabletop, you could actually give them this special rule. In 7th edition, I don't remember if it's in 8th, I have to take a look at the book, but it's a very flavorful rule that pays a homage to this point in the lore. And when you take a look at this grander conflict as a whole, you see a new cosmic force that enters the battleground, one that is an entirely different foe than the Imperium has met before. Either as a direct nod or just an influence, this theme, as it were, borrows heavily from the book Starship Troopers, the very first sci-fi novel or notion of a space marine, or just simply a marine or armored soldier in a powered exoskeleton, in literature, of course. But of course, in that book, they fight against arachnids from Klendathu, and that's it's an interesting parallel nonetheless, but I wanted to bring it up real quick because I think that's where Tyranids are influenced, and it's most certainly where Space Marines are influenced from. But one canon conflict I do want to talk about before we go further into Calgar's life is that another source tells us that Calgar lost all of his limbs in the year 976, 41st millennium. Or, some 200 years after the First Tyrannic Wars. And this is the source of his bionic eye, and, well, not real other limbs like his arms and legs, but it's not substantiated in the later lore, so I would really disregard this as retconned, to be totally honest with you guys. But in the pursuit of delivering as much lore about a given character as possible, this felt worth bringing up to you. But after the first Tyrannic Wars, Marneus Calgar leads his chapter to many other incursions throughout the years. Events such as the War for Thrax, the Siege of Zalathros, and a number of other engagements were all pivotal victories that Calgar won in the name of the Imperium and the Ultramarines. One standout engagement is the Battle of Auror's Sepulcher. And as the story goes, as legend is told, Eldar from Bealtan Craftworld were hellbent on getting back an ancient Eldar artifact on the world of Comroth. And the artifact was the Scepter of Galaxian, buried in a tomb within the Ultramarines hero Captain Auror. Surprisingly, the Eldar don't just attack. They actually go through this diplomatically at first, negotiating with the planetary governor of Comrath. And that might be something to mention. Although there's pretty open hostilities between every race in Warhammer 40k, the Imperium does not work alongside, or I'm sorry, they do work alongside the Tau, Eldar, hell, even Necron at times. And it might be worth exploring in its own video, but either way, negotiations failed, and Bealtan, Alatok, and Yandon all attacked Comroth. Marneus Calgar came to their aid, bringing the entire might of the Ultramarines chapter. And this is the first time he's brought the entire chapter to bear since the first Tyrannic Wars. But he defended the Sepulcher of Auror, repelling the multiple waves of Eldar attacks. And after a day and a night, the Eldar sent forth the towering, writhing presence of an avatar of Kala Mensha Kane, the Eldar god of war. Consequently enough, it is also the High Elf, Dark Elf, and Wood Elf god of murder, war, bloodshed. But I mean, there's no connection at all, right? Whatever. But the Chapter Master and Avatar fought in a gruesome duel on the steps of the Sepulcher. The Avatar of Kane cleaved deep into Marneus Calgar's armor before the Lord of Macragge punched a hole clean through the Avatar's stomach. I'm sure there was a moment where he peered through the newly created orifice and said some line from an Arnold movie about the Avatar leaving enough room in his stomach for his fist before he teetered backwards, falling over. But this put the Eldar to rout and spelled victory for the boys in blue. Following this engagement, though, there are a number of other notable occurrences across the years. Marneus destroys another hive fleet from Kraken, this time hardened by his skills during the first Tyrannic Wars. Basically, Papa Smurf is getting himself into all sorts of galactic shenanigans, but one reoccurring thorn in the side of all Ultramarines are the Word Bearers. This feud dates back to the Horus Heresy, and if you've read the book The First Heretic, you know where I'm going with this. But essentially, the book opens up with the Emperor coming to the Word Bearers' home planet of Colchis. Accompanied by Roboute Guilliman and his Ultramarines, the Emperor went to put an end to Lorgar's, the Word-Bearer's Primarch, veneration of the Emperor. And it wasn't simply that Lorgar really liked the Emperor and wanted him to circle yes or no on his Valentine's Day card. No, it goes much deeper than that. Lorgar was putting the Emperor on a divine pedestal, deifying him and spreading that quote-unquote faith with each world he captured. And this was in direct opposition to the secular imperial truth that the Emperor was spreading. Still, it took a century for him to do anything about it, but the Emperor eventually annihilated the capital city of the planet of Kur, Monarchia, dubbed the Perfect City. In the ashes of the city, he made the entire Word Bearers Legion, Lorgar included, bow before him while the Ultramarines watched. So you can see some serious daddy issues blossoming from this moment alone. This eventually leads to the Word Bearers' campaigns against Ultramarines and Ultramar, and with such famous battles such as the Battle of Calth. And this result is a 10 millennia long blood feud that starts in the Horus Heresy. This boils down to Marneus Calgar through the Demon Prince Imkar, a former chaplain and dark apostle of the Word Bearers. His name was Malok Cartho during the Horus Heresy. He was first defeated by Captain Sicarius in the year 878, the 41st millennium, but returned some 60 years later in the year 935 of the same millennium, seizing the Ultramarine Starfort Indomitable. Calgar stormed the Starfort, fighting the Demon Prince in single combat and defeating the monster, tearing him limb from limb to send him back to the Immaterium. Or so the official report goes. In truth, Calgar, with the help of the Inquisition, bound Emkar to the warp core of the Starfort. essentially locking the demon in a form of purgatory where any attempt to escape into the material world would bind him closer to the core. Calgar then ordered half of the 5th Company of Ultramarines to garrison the Starfort while it wandered a secret, remote, and uncharted portion of Ultramar. I feel like I might not have been so forthcoming in this. Ultramar is the grand realm, I guess you could say, of the Ultramarine. For all the planets that they've kind of created, it's like the 500 planets of Ultramar during the Horus Heresy that is then inherited by every subsequent chapter master of Ultramarines. But all would have been fine and dandy here if the Iron Warriors hadn't decided to free Emkar once more in 997 of this same millennium, the first. The Iron Warriors allied with the demon and launched a campaign of destruction across the realm of 500 planets, burning their way through Ultramar. Calgar once again met the Demon Prince in one-on-one battle on the planet of Talisar.
You all heard Varro's words. The demon is vulnerable, exposed, and we have one chance to end this. Right here and right now, the fate of Ultramar is in our hands. You are the best and bravest of your chapter, and though we may die in these mountains, we will die in service to something greater than blood, something greater than land. We fight for what we know is right. I will lead you in that fight, and all I ask is that you fight like the heroes you are.
Procuring an ancient artifact from the days of the Horus Heresy, Calgar was able to finally banish the demon, soul and all, using a shard of Erebus. Now, for those that aren't familiar with the Horus Heresy series, a shard of Erebus is one of 8 ritual daggers called an athame, all made from the shards of a sword called the anathame. So you have athame is the dagger, anathame is the sword. This very sword was the one that wounded Horus and allowed for the Chaos Gods to manipulate and convert him to the ruinous powers. These weapons are so potent that they essentially rewrite the fabric of reality, preventing even the superhuman regenerative abilities of a Primarch to work. They're serious business, and they come up again and again through many of the publications from the early Horus Heresy all the way up to now, 10 millennia later. All of this really leads to the current events of the Dark Imperium. Shortly after the destruction and banishment of Emkar, Ultramar was besieged by a portion of Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. You know, since he was so busy throwing a black fortress into the surface of Cadia, destroying it. But as Cadia was being destroyed, the survivors formed the Celestine Crusade, accompanied by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Paul, the living Saint Celestine, and a Marshal of the Black Templars, Marius Almorech. Using the webway, they were aided by the Eldar, namely Yvrain of the newly formed Inari Eldar faction. Their mission was to deliver Call and his auto-reliquary device to the stasis chamber that housed the dying form of the Ultramarines Primarch, Roboute Guilliman. And you can imagine this would be a pretty tense moment given the climate of the current situation going on. Marneus Calgar was presented with a choice. On one side, First Captain Severus Agamemnon and Inquisitor Katerina Greyfax opposed the motives of the Celestine Crusade, fearing that the Eldar had some wicked eldritch plan to corrupt the body of the Primarch. On the other side, you have the Celestinians, as they were called in the Gathering Storm narrative, arguing to be given access to the Primarch. Now remember, Ultramarines are a chapter of practical means. They aren't prone to bouts of emotional outbursts like the Spice Wolves, nor do they act unerringly in the face of logic like more crass chapters. First Captain Agamemnon realizes that the enemy has besieged Ultramar, and Macragge itself is under heavy attack by the Black Legion. The Eldar pose a potential security threat, and no one is sure what the auto-reliquary does save for Call, who won't answer any inquiries about the device, period. So, Agamemnon is looking at the practical route here. Kill the Xenos, and the Celestinians, investigate the reliquary. The Inquisitor is more Puritan than her peers, so she just wants to fucking burn everything and then screech. I hate it. There are elements of the Inquisition that just really bother me from a narrative standpoint. The Space Marine chapters are very autonomous, so I get bothered when the Inquisition just Imperial creeds their way into the storyline. Either way, the decision hangs on a knife's edge. The deciding factor is Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius. Known for his precognitive abilities, the librarian had been granted troubling visions prior, which he had shared with Calgar. Barrow believed that the events unfolding, the fall of Cadia, the attack on Macragge, the arrival of the Saint, all of these were parts of the visions that were coming to fruition. Calgar took this into consideration and ultimately decided to allow the Celestine Crusade into the Shrine of Guilliman. There was plenty of debating back and forth, but that really isn't worth going into since we're ultimately talking about Daddy Calgar here. The stipulation for access to the shrine, though, is that they are tended by a large armored guard of Ultramarines, and Inquisitor Greyfax gets to execute Call if he is seen as a traitor, which, by Puritan inquisitorial standards, is a pretty low bar. Did you sneeze and not say "Emperor bless you"? You're a traitor. Killed. Calgar, along with the small force sent to the Temple of Correction, were immediately attacked by a large Chaos counterattack. Faced with defending the Primarch and their home planet, Calgar held the line against the Chaos Terminators, looking to break into the temple and cease the Archmagos' work. Belisarius Cawl, with the help of Yvraine, channeling the psychic powers of the Eldar god of the dead, Aeneid, were able to use the Auto-Reliquary to completely heal the Primarch. Of course, to Calgar, this looked like sacrilege. I mean, the book kind of describes it like the Auto-Reliquary deploying into this essentially like tentacle porn and covering Primarch. I wish I wasn't being so hyperbolic about it, but it's kind of what it is. And try as he might to end the seemingly cursed ritual, he was held in place by the Terminators before finally being brought low by the mass of heretics. And as Cawl finished his procedure, the renewed form of the Primarch Roboute Guilliman emerged from the throne he had been interred upon for millennia. Wearing his armor of fate, he leapt on the enemy, clearing the temple of any remnants of chaos, for no servant of the ruinous power could stand against the might of a Primarch scorned. Calgar, although badly wounded, was able to recover at least partially in time for the ceremony at the Fortress of Hera. There, Guilliman accepted the command of the Ultramarines from First Captain Agamon. As command passed to him, he turned onto the gravely wounded chapter master and bowed to Calgar, asking permission to lead the chapter once more. Marneus Calgar, the consummate master of the one-up, dropped to his knee, or rather fell to his knee, and father and son knelt together. Calgar pledging unending fealty to the Primarch in the same breath as his father took up the mantle of leadership once more. Guilliman quickly took to commanding the defenses of Macragge, repelling the attackers deftly and committing himself to the Terran Crusade to reunite with his father. And as for Calgar, he retained the title of Chapter Master, and would be granted the new title of Lord Defender of the Greater Ultramar, guarding the realm of Ultramar, while Guilliman became the Lord Commander of the Imperium, picking up the Emperor's sword and launching the Indomitus Crusade. In the years to come, Mortarion, the demon Primarch of the Death Guard, launched a massive assault on the realm of Ultramar, known as the Plague Wars. Calgar led the overall command of and the defense of the realm against the plagues that racked the system. Invading from the galactic north in the early portions of the 42nd millennium, Mortarion's forces swept wildly through Ultramar, forcing the Ultramarines to commit to land campaigns on multiple fronts. Despite Calgar's tactical acumen, he was no match for a Primarch, and the defenders of Ultramar lost more and more ground to the demonic forces ravaging each planet. Reinforced by Primaris Marines upon Fleet Avenger, they were able to stymie the onslaught for only a little while longer before Mortarion's forces picked up momentum once more, pushing deeper and deeper into the sector. With each ground campaign came more destruction of the Ultramar defense fleet, subsequent star fortresses. Over 3/4 of Ultramar had been contaminated and overrun, with the plague fleets closing in on Macragge in due time. In the 111th year of the 42nd millennium, Guilliman arrived at the head of his massive fleet, fresh off of the Indomitus Crusade, and brought all of his fury to bear upon his corrupted brother. Executing his newly devised Spear of Espandor counterattack, Guilliman and Calgar were able to pin the Death Guard back to one planet, before the Death Guard were able to use a virus bomb as cover to escape the system, thus losing the war and the Imperium squeezing by with a Pyrrhic victory. At some point during this, though, Marneus Calgar becomes the first Space Marine, or classic Space Marine, to undergo the process of becoming a Primaris Space Marine. Even with Belisarius Cawl, the guy who made the Primaris, at the helm, he told Calgar that this would have like a 67% failure rate, because 33% of the time it works every time. Calgar, being a stoic man of staunch duty and dedication to the Imperium, still agreed to the surgery. He knew that the enemies of the Imperium that they were to face would be far stronger than what he could contend with, and he was already struggling as it was. Calgar was then implanted with the Magnificat, the Belisarian Furnace, and the Sinew Coils, all three new organs exclusive to the Primaris. Despite the riskiness of the procedure and a good deal of character armor, Marneus Calgar emerged from the process as the first traditional Space Marine to become a Primaris. Armored in his new Mark X BMW Audi Gravis armor, the armor of Hercules, Calgar was ready for his next engagement, which may or may not have been some famous last words. In the current narrative of Warhammer 40,000, Calgar was on Vigilus, defending it against the Black Legion and Lord Harkon Worldclaimer. In what is called the War of Beasts, Calgar and Abaddon square off against one another in a battle of tactics before finally meeting in a hand-to-hand fight. Calgar and Abaddon clash on the soil of Vigilus, the sword of Drachnian raking against the armor of Heracles. The two exchange titanic blows to one another, Calgar going for the whole stomach death punch attack that worked in the Avatar of Cain. What Marneus is really doing is stalling Abaddon. Prior to the fight, Calgar had allied with the Eldar of Saim-Han to make a kamikaze attack on the Vengeful Spirit by ramming it head-on. The Eldari ships are able to avoid radar while their Psykers dodge Black Legion sorcerers. And as the duel raged on, Horus eventually gained the upper hand, splitting Calgar open, exploding his primary heart and severely crippling his secondary one. Before Abaddon can make the killing blow though, the Eldar smash into the Vengeful Spirit, the Gloriana-class ship reeling as it lumbers in its death throes. This forces Abaddon to fall back to the Vengeful Spirit immediately, making for an emergency warp jump that just barely saves the ship. The rest of Vigilus ablaze, we see Calgar surviving his wounds and commanding the defense from the Apothecarian, never faltering in his duty to the Imperium or in his promise to Roboute Guilliman that Vigilus would not fall while under his command. And we all know that Space Marines are heroic, and that's sort of the underlying plot device of the Warhammer 40,000 storyline, right? Hey, don't worry, some Space Marine will shred his air guitar through this entire mess and Deus Ex Machina his way out of it. But with Marneus Calgar, you really have a Space Marine apart from the rest. Undying devotion and loyalty to the Emperor, Roboute Guilliman, and his chapter. This is a man that has seen the realm of Ultramar restored to some of its finest moments before the Plague Wars. He has led the Ultramarines from the front, and quite honestly has been the face of the chapter for as long as I can personally remember. There is an adage about the Ultramarines being Smurfs and getting all the cool toys because of the favor of a particular writer of their fluff. We all know who that is. But be that as it may, Calgar has always stood out to me as a direct counter to that over-the-top, infallible imagery of the Ultramarines. I really enjoy the character arc they've devised for him in Gathering Storm and the humility that is seen throughout the Dark Imperium story. They really kind of broke that oh, this guy is undefeatable trope. And there's a pretty dangerous moment where you see the sort of parallel of the events between Guilliman and Calgar as the same between Lionel Johnson and Luther, or even the Emperor and Horus. But I think I want to say good that lies within Calgar puts those fears to rest. And as a result, we have a gripping tale in Vigilus Ablaze that shows the tenacity of Calgar and the growing narrative to come. I imagine that we won't see much of Marneus in the next 1 or 2 installments of this ongoing story, but I'm sure we can look forward to plenty more of the chapter master of the Ultramarines. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this journey about Marneus Calgar. Hopefully you learned a bit more about Papa Smurf and his connection to Grandpapa Smurf, or Roboute Guilliman, as well as his long-lasting history with the Imperium. But as always guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.